Ronald Reagan was the 40th President of the United States, serving from 1981 to 1989. He was a member of the Republican Party and is considered one of the most prominent conservative figures in American history. During his presidency, Reagan implemented several policies that significantly impacted the country. He strongly advocated laissez-faire economics, which emphasizes free market capitalism and reduced government intervention in the economy. His economic policies, known as Reaganomics, focused on reducing government spending, taxes, and regulation. Reagan also pursued a firm anti-communist foreign policy, which included supporting anti-communist movements in Central America and providing aid to the Afghan Mujahideen in their fight against the Soviet Union. He also played a crucial role in ending the Cold War, which had defined international relations for decades. Ronald Reagan was a dedicated supporter of the American space program. During his presidency, he directed NASA to develop a permanently manned space station and to do it within a decade. This directive led to the creation of the International Space Station, ISS, which is still in operation today. Reagan's support for NASA was not limited to the ISS. He also offered dedicated support for NASA's Space Shuttle program, which launched its first mission in 1981. After the Shuttle Challenger exploded in 1986, Reagan delivered a moving speech to the nation, insisting that the tragedy wouldn't halt America's drive to explore space. Reagan's vision for space exploration was rooted in his belief in American exceptionalism and his desire to maintain American leadership worldwide. He saw space exploration as a way to inspire future generations and demonstrate American ingenuity and technological prowess. On March 30, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was shot and wounded by John Hinckley Jr. in Washington, D.C. as he was returning to his limousine after a speaking engagement in the Washington Hilton. Hinckley believed the attack would impress actress Jodie Foster, with whom he had developed an erotomaniac obsession. Hinckley was found not guilty because of insanity on charges of attempting to assassinate the president. Coincidentally, that same year, however, Pope John Paul II was the target of an assassination attempt on May 13, 1981, by a Turkish gunman named Mehmet Ali Agca. Agca was a member of the Turkish ultranationalist group, the Grey Wolves I. The Pope was shot 4 times and was seriously injured, but he survived the attack after undergoing surgery. President Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II had a close relationship, and their collaboration helped end the Cold War. The two leaders shared a deep commitment to democracy and human rights and worked together to promote these values worldwide. After the assassination attempt, President Reagan ordered the Secret Service to provide additional protection for the Pope during his visits to the United States. The relationship between Reagan and the Pope continued to grow stronger over the years, and the two leaders collaborated on several initiatives aimed at promoting peace and democracy around the world. According to former Attorney General Edwin Meese III, Reagan and John Paul II had similar goals in ending the oppressive influence of the Soviet regime in Eastern Europe, Poland in particular, as the Pope's native country. The two leaders were able to coordinate their efforts to put increasing political, economic, and information pressure on the Soviet Union and General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev, which in the end helped bring about the collapse of the Soviet Union. Muammar Gaddafi was the de facto leader of Libya from 1969 until 2011, when he was ousted in a revolt and later killed by rebel forces. He was known for his eccentric leadership, behavior, and aggressive stances on the international stage. In 1986, the United States Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps carried out airstrikes, codenamed Operation El Dorado Canyon, against Libya on the 15th of April, 1986, in retaliation for the West Berlin discotheque bombing 10 days earlier, which US President Ronald Reagan blamed on Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. The airstrikes were aimed at destroying Gaddafi's military capabilities and his ability to support terrorist activities. The operation succeeded, with several ground targets destroyed including 14 MiG-23s, 2 helicopters, and 5 primary ground radars. However, the Libyan leader survived the attack, and both sides claimed victory. Reagan's presidency was not without controversy. In 1986, the United States carried out airstrikes against Libya in retaliation for the West Berlin discotheque bombing, which President Reagan blamed on Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Reagan also faced criticism for his handling of the Iran-Contra affair, in which members of his administration secretly sold weapons to Iran and used the proceeds to fund anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua. After the airstrikes, President Reagan sought to maintain pressure on Libya through tightened sanctions and overt measures designed to foment regime change against Gaddafi. Though Gaddafi clung to power, his support for terrorism notably faded in the aftermath of Reagan's bombing of Libya. President Ronald Reagan used the term economic checks and balances. Although this term is not commonly used in economics, it is possible that Reagan used it to refer to the balance between government intervention and free market capitalism in the economy. President Reagan advocated for laissez-faire economics, where a government's role is reduced. He believed a free market and capitalism would solve the nation's woes. Reaganomics was based on the theory of supply-side economics. This theory proposes that tax cuts encourage economic expansion enough to broaden the tax base over time. The increased revenue from a more robust economy is supposed to offset the initial revenue loss from the tax cuts. Reagan's economic policies focused on reducing government spending, taxes, and regulation. His philosophy was, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. President Ronald Reagan signed a bill to preserve Social Security on April 20, 1983. During the signing ceremony, he said, "This bill demonstrates for all time our nation's ironclad commitment to Social Security. It assures the elderly that America will always keep the promises made in troubled times a half a century ago." Reagan's presidency was marked by his advocacy of laissez-faire economics, which emphasized free market capitalism and reduced government intervention in the economy. His economic policies, known as Reaganomics, focused on reducing government spending, taxes, and regulation. On June 12, 1987, President Ronald Reagan gave a speech at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, Germany, challenging Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. The Berlin Wall symbolized the Cold War and the division between East and West Germany. Reagan's speech was seen as a call for freedom and democracy, becoming one of the most famous speeches of his presidency. 2 years later, on November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall was finally opened after nearly 3 decades of separation between East and West Germany. The fall of the Berlin Wall marked the end of the Cold War and the beginning of a new era in European history. The Just Say No campaign was an anti-drug initiative launched by First Lady Nancy Reagan in the early 1980s-12. The campaign encouraged children to reject experimenting with or using drugs by simply saying the word no. The movement became an American catchphrase in the 1980s and continued for over a decade. Nancy Reagan traveled the country to endorse the campaign, appearing on television news programs, talk shows, and public service announcements. The campaign may have led to a spike in public concern over the country's drug problem. In addition to the Just Say No campaign, President Reagan signed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act in 1986, which allotted $1.7 billion to continue fighting the war on drugs and established mandatory minimum prison sentences for specific drug offenses. During the Reagan years, prison penalties for drug crimes skyrocketed, and the number of people incarcerated for non-violent drug offenses increased from 50,000 in 1980 to more than 400,000 by 1997-13. Ronald Reagan's economic policies were nicknamed Reaganomics. The Wall Street Journal coined the term in 1980 to describe Reagan's financial plan. Reaganomics was based on the principles of supply-side economics. The theory posits that by reducing taxes and regulations, businesses and individuals will have more money to invest and spend, stimulating economic growth. Reducing government spending. Reagan aimed to reduce the size of the federal government by cutting spending on social programs and other areas. Cutting taxes. Reagan believed that lowering taxes would stimulate economic growth by giving individuals and businesses more money to spend and invest. Deregulation. Reagan sought to reduce government regulations on businesses, which he believed stifled innovation and economic growth. Tightening the money supply. Reagan's administration worked with the Federal Reserve to reduce inflation by tightening the money supply. Reaganomics was controversial, with critics arguing that it favored the wealthy and led to increased income inequality. However, supporters of Reagan's policies credit them with helping to end the stagflation of the 1970s and spurring economic growth in the 1980s.